session. We really appreciate your attendance, and we got the recording started now, so thank you. All right, so let's talk a little bit about your presenters, so you get to know us a little bit. I'm Mike Minchaka. You may have come to some of the earlier sessions that I was involved in. I'm a professor in the Department of Learning, Design, and Technology and University of Hawaii at Manoa. My specialty area is distance education across many different areas. I do research on e-learning, technology, and a particular passion of mine is social justice, especially as that dovetails with technology. I've been teaching online since 1997, so I've been doing this for quite a while in different iterations, from times when we just used chat and text and didn't have any sound or video. So we've come a long way with the maturity of the technology and what we're able to do now. And Zoom is a wonderful tool. And I'm sure in another 10 years, we're going to be equally flabbergasted at whatever the next major development is. In my spare time, I like to travel, so there's our last trip. We got to go this summer for a bit of time to the Mammoth Lake region in California, and that was nice. That's my son. He's in college on the mainland, and that's my wife there, and one of our hikes. So we like to do that. We like to hike. We do like to travel. We're hoping to do that more soon when all of this craziness passes. And then I like to play Scrabble in my spare time, such as it is. So that's a little bit about me. Thank you. And I'll turn it over to Ria to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. We're so excited to have you with us this morning, and we thank you for spending your Saturday morning learning about ways to improve your instruction. So my name is Ria Nathrani, and I'm a 7th grade teacher at Hopwood Middle School in Saipan, and I hold a doctorate in education. So I've been involved with our public school system, trying to create courses that are effective and showcasing some samples and tools that our teachers could use. So I've truly enjoyed this experience, and I'm excited to be learning and working with you all today. So other than that part of my life, I also like traveling, like Mike. I did recently travel, so it was a nice change. But other than that, I love doing nail art. So that always makes me more motivated. And then we also have different ways to express ourselves. So thank you so much for being here.
Howdy, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Paul Salira. Born and raised here in Saipan. I actually work with Ria in another department. I've been teaching for more than 20 years. Right now, I've settled myself in 5th grade. I love 5th grade, but I've mainly taught all of the grade levels in elementary. I'm a big advocate of educational technology, and always find ways to find new ways to integrate technology into the classroom. So I find it really wonderful that with technology, like Mike saying, how it has matured from just chat, and now we have Zoom, just making everything way better, easier, right? And wonderful. I mean, imagine if we didn't have this technology and we had the pandemic, we wouldn't be able to have a school continue. Maybe we could, but it'd be really difficult, right? But yeah, I like integrating technology into my classroom. I'm pretty active. That's my family there. You can see on the screen. They're trying to get rid of me, but I said, no, you're stuck with me for life. So no, I'm kidding. But when I'm not doing stuff with my family, like going around hiking or going to the beach, I like to tinker around with cars or just relax and enjoy life in paradise here in the CNMI. So thank you. Hope you enjoy our presentation today.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Ria, for those nice introductions. So we'll also get to, oh, my thing is going, there we go, getting to know you a little bit. And so just a quick summary of over the past 10 modules, I've been keeping track of data as it comes in. So all of you are typically new to online teaching. So the overall picture is about 60% or more of attendees have tended to be either just teaching online only 1 year or even less, or sometimes hadn't gotten quite to doing that yet, just because, you know, the circumstances were okay to still be face-to-face in some regions. So glad that you're joining us to learn and build new skills. That's really fabulous, and just goes to show how dedicated teachers and educators in general are. You know, sometimes we get beat up in the media and in other places, but when the rubber hits the road, you all show up, and that is just really fantastic. About half K-12 teachers, and then the rest, an even distribution of administrators, librarians, specialists in other areas, college instructors, and the like. So very wide array of different expertises. And then many of you, almost half, and I think many that are on this morning, I recognize several names there that have been to many different of our modules. So we sincerely appreciate that as well. Thank you so much.
Hey, Mike, I have a suggestion.
Sure.
Maybe because we have such a small audience, today is very intimate. Maybe if you can turn your camera on and just, you know, just say your name and where you're from, and maybe where you work.
Sure,
quick.
I think we could do that. That's a fabulous idea. So what I'll do, if you don't mind, it's easier, I think, if I put people on the spot just to kind of go in order. If you don't want to, just put pass, say pass, right,
Yeah.
in the chat. We don't want you to do it if, you know, you're not comfortable with it, but I can just go top down from the list of names here. And that'll be very easy. I think that that's a great idea. So we would start with Amanda, and so name, and then just where they're located. What else did you want in there, Lynette?
So just your name and where you're from, because we do have some folks from different areas, and either what you do or where you work.
And I'll actually stop sharing for this part so that we can see each other a little better, because I can share back. All right, so we'll start with Amanda. Or no, I'm sorry, it's not Amanda, it's Amara. My apologies.
No worries. Good morning, everyone. My name is Amara Manzana. I'm an associate professor for the Guam Community College, but I teach at the high school level at Ukuru High School.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for joining us, Amara. And then, so next up would be Dora.
Good morning. I'm Dora Ferris, and I'm a high school teacher for GDOE.
Excellent. Thank you for joining us this morning, Dora. And that would take us to Israel.
Hello, my name is Israel Tupilahake. I'm from American Samoa, and I teach computers from K5 to 8th grade. Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Computers, very importante. All right. Is it Jacqueline? If I said that incorrectly, please, my apologies. You can correct me. You're up next.
You said it correctly. My name is Jacqueline Balahaja, and I'm with Pacific Historic Parks out of the island of Guam. Excellent.
Right. Wow. So just from all over in different areas. That's just wonderful. I believe that takes us to Leora. Hopefully I said that correctly. If not, correct me. Oh, you got to turn your microphone on. I see the waving.
There we go.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Laura. I teach 6th grade ELA at Hopwood Middle School in Saipan.
Wonderful. And
Love the ribbon.
Yeah, I like the bow there. That's wonderful. Nice little touch. See, so use of the technology. Perfect, thank you. And that takes us to Lucia.
Okay. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm the new Parao Minister of Education, Chief of Teacher Training. So I'm just learning from everybody. I used to be a first grade teacher for 10 years and became a vice principal and principal, and now I'm a teacher trainer. That's why I really need to be doing this, because I have to know what is going on with the new teachers, old teachers, and everything with the COVID.
Great, so you're helping
Yeah.
everyone too on top of
Yes.
that. Wonderful. Thank you and good morning. And that takes us to Monica. Don't forget your microphone, Monica.
Buenos dias, dispensa. Monica Pangilinan, 7th grade from Saipan. I teach Chamorro bilingual.
Excellent. Buenos días a ti también. All right, perfecto. All right, then that takes us to Nieves, and hopefully I said that correctly. And don't forget to put your microphone on. There you
I said
go.
I'm probably the oldest one of the group. I'm a special educator by profession. I'm a retired educator since 2014, but been serving as an educational consultant for University of Guam Cedars, and I actually serve Saipan, Palau, the FSM, and Guam. So related to special education, but I try to sit in some of these things as much as possible. Not sure I'm going to be able to stay on for the 3 hours, but we'll stay on as long as I can. So.
Wonderful, no worries. And I think seasoned is a good word there. So thank you. And takes us to Norma.
Good morning. My name is Norma Guerrero, based out of Guam. I teach, I'm a Guam Community College, and but I'm based in the GDOE Public High School, which is George Washington High School. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that's excellent. So we got the college there too. We have just wide array. This is fabulous. And then I think final there is Yvonne.
Half a day. My name is Yvonne Tam. I guess I'm one of the longest participants since module 2 or 3. So thank you for having me. And I station in Guam, and I do work for GCC, which is Guam Community College, and I station in Southern High. And half a day, this is one of my dogs.
Hello. So that's great. We have an extra attendee this morning. So
Yeah.
fabulous. So very good idea, Lynette. Thank you for that. Let me get back to the there we go. All right, so that's getting to know you. And then also just thank you for your evaluations. And as Lynette mentioned, please do continue to do the evaluations, because we do look at them and they're important. And we've had good evaluations as well, so particularly proud of that. So today's objectives will be to explore virtual lesson best practices. So in order to understand assessment of your own virtual lessons, we'll do a little bit of background on some best practices, review a couple of models for designing and assessing virtual instruction. So thinking about, how do I know if I'm doing a good job? And then discuss some personal lesson assessment perspectives. So you hear from a couple of the presenters that talk about specifically what they do, and then review some examples, and then investigate this relationship between design and assessment. And what I mean by that is this idea of building things, but then seeing how what we built is working the way that we want it to. I mean, that's really the focus of this morning's presentation, is really thinking about, are we addressing the things that we intended to, and how can we think about that? So let me go ahead and start with my part. Mine's kind of the big picture, and then you'll hear a little bit more about that, and then specifics from my wonderful co-presenters this morning. So One of the ways to think about how you can assess your own lessons is to think about how you assess your students. And there's a category of performance assessment that really lends itself well to the virtual environment. I mean, it doesn't replace all of the different types of assessments that you have. So you're still going to have tests and quizzes and all of those kinds of things that you do traditionally. But particularly in a virtual environment, thinking about assessment from a performance assessment standpoint is really key. And what I mean by that is having students do things and create things versus just having a testing approach, right? So having them produce artifacts that allow them to showcase their creativity and that they're meeting the objectives that you're particularly interested in innovative or creative fashion. And so this is a lesson plan from the Guampedia, which we've shared a couple of times in some of the other modules, just a wonderful collection of lessons that are tied to standards, but then also tied to that cultural connection as well. That's so important. So in this particular one, it's asking students to engage in Guam's cultural heritage by visiting different historic sites, maybe talking to people and using other ways of gathering information, and then creating a video from that, right? So and then they can look at each other's videos, and then from there they can discuss issues around those sites and the importance of historic preservation. So it ties to that local, it ties to that cultural connection, it builds technology skills in terms of creating video, and it's also a performance assessment as opposed to testing, because it allows those students to say, okay, here's what I learned and here's how I can showcase what I learned. So that's the first part, right? Is thinking about it. Okay, what are some ways that I can think about how I build the types of things that I want to assess in order to decide how then I can measure whether I'm doing a good job in my own virtual learning as well. So we'll kind of make that connection here over time. And then I have links embedded within the Guampedia and within this presentation and on another slide in the presentation that links to all of the things that I talk about here, so that you can all go back to them and look at them a little more thoroughly at a later time if you so desire. So what I mean by measuring the measurement is you're measuring instructor success by first thinking about what student success is. And I'm going to break that down a little bit more as well. So let's review. And so many of you said that you had been here for previous modules. So this is just 2 slides from module 5, but it kind of makes that connection between assessing students and then assessing our own work and our own instruction and teaching. So once again, rethinking your assessments in online learning is kind of a key way of measuring whether you're doing well as well. And some of the tips that we gave in module 5 is, you don't need to assess everything. The online virtual environment does produce a lot of artifacts, right? There's the chat, there's student discussions, you can record things, you can have them fill out things, you can do Google Docs. I mean, there's so much possibility for things that are created that you kind of have to decide, what do I need to know versus what is nice to know? What are those artifacts? What are those things that my students are doing? What are ways that I can gather information about whether I'm doing a good job? And there's a lot of different ways to do that. We're going to talk about the different ways to really think about, am I doing a good job? And then, as I mentioned, assigning performance tasks to apply their knowledge. And so stated another way, students have to do something, right? And then we mentioned the Global Learning Academy. I won't go over that in specific, but this is just a reminder from that module 5, connecting to today's topic, is that when you're creating those performance assessment activities, really they should be focusing on those higher order thinking approaches as much as possible in the Bloom's taxonomy versus those lower ones. So creating things, evaluating things, analyzing things, applying things, right? How can they apply their knowledge? How can they justify, take a stand? How can they do an analysis and then creatively defend that, right? So there's a lot of different types of possibilities, but the main point is you know, getting to those higher order thinking capabilities, right? And so here's just a quick table, you know, of some ways that we might traditionally assess, and that there's no judgment about what's right or wrong here, because we can use both and we can pick and choose. But in a digital environment, as much as possible, if we can transition to some of these more performance-oriented one, it becomes a little bit easier to get a bigger picture overall when we're not always in that environment with those students, right? And so, you know, from recalling lower order knowledge to applying higher order understanding, from a focus on exams to a focus on performance and what they can do actively. And then from this idea that knowledge is given to them versus you give them some tasks in which their learning of the knowledge is embedded in doing those tasks, right? And then obviously assessed with appropriate support as needed. And then here are just some of the verbs that you might think about in your objectives when we move to a performance assessment model, right? Like, what are the things that I can have? What are the active things that I can have students do that fit with the performance approach? We can have them justify, compare, apply, describe, recognize, evaluate, summarize, model. See, they're just more active things. And I'm sure many of you already use these approaches, and you're going to hear this from some of the co-presenters as well. But just some ideas there of some terms that you might use when building objectives for your students. So some approaches to assessing your virtual lessons. So this is thinking about how we build those assessments for students. And now let's transition to, okay, how do we think about assessing our own lessons based on the things that we collect, right? And so there's a lot of different ways to do this, right? You can see whether you're meeting you can see whether students are meeting the outcomes and the objectives that you've outlined for them, right? So that's one way. So whether that's grades or rubrics or other assessment. So one way you're you're doing a good job is, students are getting it or students are not getting it. You can also see whether your students are engaged, and we're going to give some examples of how to do that, whether they're motivated. You can make sure that your content and instructions are clear, and then you can talk to your students or get evaluations from them in some manner so that you get user experience, right? So that could be informally in a chat with polls, that can be through surveys that you provide, where they can actually give specific feedback either about overall courses or particular units, or even just one experience that they had, like, you know, how did this table discussion go? What did you think about it, right? And we're going to give some examples for that. So there's a lot of ways of assessing virtual lessons, and we're going to try and use this workshop to kind of break down some of those possibilities for you. And then I want to focus on assessing your lessons through student assessment, right? So that was one of the key points that I was making as well. And then sometimes you'll hear me say evaluation instead of assessment. That's just my term. So if you hear me say evaluation, what I mean by my terminology, how I separate evaluation and assessment, is that assessment I view as my assessment of my students. And evaluation I see as evaluation of how I'm doing either in the program or as an instructor, right? So that's just, I use those terms sometimes interchangeably so as not to confuse you. When I say assessment, I mean student learning. When I say, sometimes I'll say evaluation instead of assessing your own lessons, I mean looking at what we're doing in our own materials and whatnot. So in order to get to that point where we're able to really look at what we do, we have to have good design about what we create. So this goes back to this idea of performance assessment. So in order to get to an area where we create the objectives that we want clearly outlined for our students, and then tying those to whatever lesson or experience we want our students have, you kind of have to backwards plan. And what I mean by that is typically, especially in a virtual environment, you want to think about what those outcomes are first. So you actually start with, what do I want my learners to do, to understand, to know, right? And so you might list those objectives first and say, okay, so what do I want my students to do? Oops, sorry there, hit the wrong button. And then from there, you look at that list of things that you want your students to do, and then you think about what's the type of evidence that would show that students are able to do and understand the things that I want them to, right? And that might be a test, that might be a quiz, it might be a paper, but it also could be a video, it could be a discussion, it could be a PowerPoint or Google Slides presentation that they put. It could be group work with some reflection, right? So there's a lot of different things that you might have students do or create that you can assess. And so you kind of have to think about what those things are, right? Okay, what can I gather that would work well to understand that I made the connection that I wanted to make, that students are getting the outcomes that I want. And then you obviously have to build whatever the unit plan learning experience is, right? So you have to develop the materials around those desired outcomes. And sometimes when you're doing this process, you know, you might think, oh, well, I can't do that with everything because then I'm just building all sorts of lessons, right? And that's just too much work. Totally understand that. So sometimes you might just look at the things that you already have created that are in the arsenal of assessment artifacts and experiences that you've created over the many years that you've been a teacher, and then say, okay, how could I think about modifying or changing or adapting, or maybe even just using the way they are, those things that I already have, but then think about how is that going to play out in my virtual lesson, right? So what are some differences, some nuances? What might I need to be concerned about? Like if I'm doing group work, all right, so I can't just say go to table, right? So do I do breakout rooms? Or if I'm having them do a discussion, how do I facilitate that discussion? Do I just let them speak out, or do I choose them in an order? Or do I build some kind of way of students can pick each other? Okay, you go, and then you pick the person that you want to. I mean, there's just a lot of possibilities, but basically it's just the idea of taking it to that next level and just reflecting a little bit in this step. What can I do differently in this environment that would help the students really get to those outcomes that I'm concerned about? And then you have to do it, right? So whatever it is, in Zoom or using some other tool or whatever they're building, I mean, you have to let them do what the thing that you want to assess is. And then once they've completed that, now that provides you with the things that now you can assess in two fashions, right? So you're looking at assessment from 2 points. One, you're looking at their artifact in the rubric that you created, or however you're assessing their learning, right? Did they get it? And at the same time, you're thinking, was my lesson successful, right? So by assessing what they're doing, at the same time, you're assessing what you're doing. And that's the reflection part, right? Like, oh, gee, the students really didn't get this particular concept that I thought I had built really nice in this experience. So what do I need to do? What do I need to modify the next time I do it to make sure that they get to that, right? And that's that art of teaching, right? And the art of teaching can never be replaced in any kind of model, because you have to decide, well, yeah, this is something that people struggle with, and just about as many students got it that I wanted them to. That's typical. or maybe more students got it than I usually get, wonderful, or maybe it's like way fewer students got it than typical, then that's when you point to, okay, it's not them, it's what I'm doing, right? And so that's when you think about, okay, you know, sometimes it's because of the students maybe not doing what they were supposed to do, and that's okay, that's part of assessment. But sometimes in the reflections, it's like, yeah, this really didn't work the way that I wanted it to work, right? And that's that backwards design and thinking about back to whether you match those objectives that you were looking at or not. All right, and so I want to kind of transition to this quality matters rubric. And I want to preface this by saying that this is a very well thought, well designed, with a lot of input from researchers and administrators and teachers and federal standards and state standards. So like a big team of people assembled, you know, they were put with the question, if you were going to outline a set of criteria that you think that people should understand and include when they're designing online virtual lessons, what would they be, right? So it's way comprehensive. So don't let it scare you that as especially a newer teacher, not a newer teacher, but a newer to online teaching teacher, that you have to attend and understand all of the sub rubrics and recommendations that are built into this very comprehensive rubric, right? That isn't necessarily the purpose, except for maybe when you get to the master level, or you're talking about a whole program that really relies on online learning, and they're, you know, they're building their whole program, right? Okay, but if you're not at that point, you're just, I just want to know that what I'm doing is good, right? What are some things that you can think about in this rubric? And I would say even just understanding the different categories is enough to know, hey, did I think about this in my virtual lessons? Did I think about this in my online teaching? So let me go over the categories. And I'm not going to go over every subcategory, because I really don't think that that's critical at this point. If that's, you know, if that's where you get to years down the line, fine. But this is really for you know, for that level, right? But let's think about what the major categories are and why those major categories exist. And you don't even have to worry whether you're addressing all the major categories in a single thing, right? That's not the purpose. It's just to think about, are these the kinds of things that I think about when I'm designing my own virtual lessons? And if not, should I be, or can I be, right? And so some things you can do and some things are not realistic to do, and that's perfectly okay. But it's a good outline, and it provides a good starting point for people that are interested to know, how do people measure whether their online instruction, their virtual lessons are good, right? And so this is one way that's concretely you can think about that you can measure. So the first category is course overview and introduction. And this is just the idea that whatever materials you create, or however you provide your instructions, whether they're verbally, you recorded them in a video, you wrote them down, whatever, that the instructions are clear for learners on how to do things and where to find things. Like where are Dr. Mike's different pieces, right? When I go to his course, can I find the things that I need to find, right? Are they clear enough? Do I know what the purpose of his course and structure is, right? So just some, does it make sense? Basically, that's it. Does your course overview? And so whether you're using, you know, Google Classroom or Seesaw, or just Google Docs, or it's handouts that are delivered to your students, right? Is it clear what they have to do and where they find the things that they need to do? So that's the course overview and introduction section. The next section are learning objectives, right? And so these are the things that you want your students to do, to know, to understand, right? So are the competencies measurable? We went back to that backwards planning design. Basically, I think about the outcomes. Were the things that I created to measure what they're doing realistic, all right? Were they really able to demonstrate that they were successful? Did I give them a way to show that they learned that was realistic, right? And this goes back to that, making the decision, gee, was it on them or was it on me, right? I mean, if you can decide it was on them, fine, then that's the grade that you give and you're comfortable with that. But in an online environment, you have to reflect a little bit, because it is definitely inherently a little bit more of a challenge, both for the teacher and the student. Then you have to think about, if they didn't meet the objectives, was that on them or was it on me? And if it was on me, what do I need to do to counter for that, right? Do I need to provide them an opportunity to show that competency? If it's something that has to be included in a grade, do I just need to modify what it is that I were doing, right? So that's this idea of learning objectives and competencies. Did you get them where you wanted to get them? And if not, what can we do to do that better? And then assessment, right? That the assessments state clearly objectives. It's that students know clearly what it is that they need to do to be successful, and that there's very specific and descriptive criteria provided for their own evaluation, right? And that assists you in determining their level of achievement, right? So basically, did what I measure tell me the story about my students that I wanted it to do? Or do I need to think about that assessment? Is anything missing? And then there's the materials, right? So the things that you create, were they clear? Did they contribute to the student's achievement? Was it integrated within the context of the lessons? Was it clear why the materials were there, right? Because there's a lot of things that we produce, right? So this is going back to thinking, and was it appropriate to the reading level? Or were there modifications that I needed to make for different levels, right? So that's a reflection on the materials as well. This is probably much more critical in an asynchronous than a synchronous. So one of the nice things about live teaching is that you can correct some of these things on the fly, like you kind of know when your students are getting it, or they can ask questions. It's much harder if you're in a situation where you're delivering a course where you have less contact with students. And that happens probably more at the community college and higher and other college level situations where that might be the case, right? So now we need to really think more about those materials, because it might be what our students get, right? They don't necessarily always have that chance to talk to us as much. So think about that also as you're putting the materials together. And then the activities, right? So the things I do that I designed that for them to do, get them to be able to achieve. But more importantly, did it provide the types of interaction that's important for people to learn? And actually, Ria's going to reinforce some of this in her talks when she talks about this importance of the connections that we make, that the learner has to have a connection to the stuff or the content, but they also have to have a connection to the teacher, instructor, and to each other, right? And the activities that you create allow for the different ways that learners have to connect in a system. That the technology, right? So that requires, like, did I learn the application? I use Seesaw. Do I know it well? Do I use Book Creator? I use Padlet, right? So did the tools really help the students? Did I teach them the tools, or did they get enough information about how to learn those tools? Did it help them stay engaged? Did it help with that motivation? So either, I mean, when you're thinking about whether that worked well in your own virtual lessons, you might, I mean, maybe you're watching them use the tools, or maybe you're asking them, hey, how did you feel about using Padlet or whatever it happens to be, right? And that those tools are as current and interesting to the students as possible. So just a reflection on what technology am I relying on, really. That's what that is. That there's support structures. I think that this is the one that I belabor a lot in my presentations. And what I always say is that the teacher cannot be the lone point of support in an online system. In other words, you can't be the person that provides the support for students in all areas. It's unrealistic, and the systems fail when that happens. You may be the primary, and maybe you provide 80% of what they need, but if there's a particular technical problem that they can't log on to Zoom, or the WebEx isn't working, or the Padlet, I mean, there's some of those things that you can have, but if there isn't a technical support that's what do they call it when you're working with the company, escalation, right? So sometimes things are escalated beyond your capability. So there has to be a place to point to say, okay, they have to be able to go somewhere. So that's part of the overall structure, right? And so, yeah, maybe you're the first level, but that it has to be clear to students and parents where they go for help, right? And so that might be partially you and a student parent teacher conference, whatever it happens to be. But in an online system, that becomes complicated, and those systems that overly rely on teachers to be the sole point of contact, that can be difficult, and that's something that should be thought about and worked out, maybe beyond your control. And then finally, accessibility, right, and usability, right? So there's so am I getting to all of those in the population that might need it? Are there differences that I have to think about? Is it readable? Is it accessible that's needed to diverse learners, right? So those are some things that you might have to consider in that as well. And then I would add my own addition on top of all of these things, like if there's not enough already, right? But these are more, I think, big picture things. I would say it's really important in an online environment to also think about social emotional learning, because it can be disconnected, it can be frustrating, it can be difficult for students when they don't have that personal connection. So how do we make sure that we promote a positive learning environment and we attend to students' social emotional learning as well? And then on top of that you hear me say, if you've been to other modules all the time, making that learning culturally relevant, right? So, I'm over here in Hawaii and Honolulu, so I view this differently than someone in Saipan or Guam or American Samoa, right? And so connecting those things is really important on top of all of these other things, probably most important, right? That's very motivating for students in their locale. So here's another example of a way to do that, perhaps in a performance approach. So students use their map skills to be able to identify islands in Micronesia based on latitude and longitude and determine approximate distances, right? So it brings in a cultural connection, it brings in math standards, it brings in geography, right? So it brings in all of these different types. It allows them to produce something maybe that's connected to their culture there. All right, so that takes us to our first break. Oh, looks like my video for some reason is not accessible. So we'll say it's what, 9?
Okay, so now that we are done with our break, we're going to go ahead and transition to the next part of our module. So thank you again for sticking with us, and we're going to be discussing about assessing our online courses. And this segment specifically focuses on online courses that are built on a learning management system. So this can include Blackboard, Google Classroom, Canvas, Schoology, Moodle, and there's countless others that are used. They all look different, but they have similar features. So online courses must be evaluated regularly so that we can determine how effective they are. And each change that we make is, of course, to improve it based on the needs of our students. So for online courses, there needs to be a process of continuous improvement and evaluation so that we can get the most out of it and our students can learn the best in the best way. Just like in a regular classroom where we would think about at the end of the day, did this lesson work? Was this assessment a good way to assess their understanding? Just like that, for online courses, we also need to assess how things worked and what can be done to change for the better. So there are three components of effective online courses that I felt were important for this module when we are talking about evaluating them. So the main focus of an online course, no matter the grade or content area, includes specific objectives about what students should know or be able to do as a result of completing the course. So whether it's a kindergarten classroom or a science biology classroom in high school, there should always be objectives presented. And how we present them is, of course, going to be a little bit different considering their skill levels and the language that we present them with. But as long as they know the goals of the course, that should be a really great way to let them know what they are learning in the course. You can also include these objectives in a syllabus and revisit them. So when you present this in the beginning of your course, throughout the different folders and modules you'll have, it's important to revisit them because that way they know, okay, this lesson is specifically tied to this objective for today. And the next part, involving students in applying what they learn instead of passively requiring them to just watch and read content. So students, just like in a normal classroom, can't retain everything that you teach if they're just receiving information. So learning is both ways. They need to apply what they learn. If not, we can't really assess how much they know about the topic and whether or not they learned what they were supposed to. So it's important to involve them and allow them to be applying what they learned. And lastly, I know that Mike touched on this with interaction between the students, the content, the teacher, and other students. So I'm going to go into that into more detail with this graphic here. This is a more visual way of representing the three types of interaction in online courses. So when we take a look at the student, we want to provide opportunities for them to interact with the content. That means we can provide them with information, with tutorials on how to do certain skills, have them read text, watch a video. We can have them take quizzes, do discussions, and even simulations, which is a great way to connect them with a real world application. But just as important, it is also necessary for students to connect with teachers during the online course, especially if it's a course that is not synchronous. If it's completely online, the student to teacher interaction becomes more difficult because you're not really interacting with them live. So in that case, teachers can provide interaction through feedback on assignments, letting them know, this was a really great way to express your understanding, and then show them areas that they can improve on. So I always do a positive and then something that they can improve on. So it's not always just negative things. It's also like what they can do or what they have done really well. So I would say something like, hi, John, thank you for explaining why you think technology is important. I think you made a really great point on this, but next time you can try to also touch up on these topics. You can also do participations and discussions. So I know it's really hard to respond to every single student in every single discussion. So you can do it. You can do it for different students in different weeks. and also respond to them. Responding to them would be their peers as well. We can also send announcements if we want to summarize what's going on in the week or how they did last week. So just keeping them informed about what's going on, providing office hours so they can know when you're available to help them in a live session, and providing students with individualized help. And lastly, we have the student to student type of interaction. So these can be done through group projects where they work together collectively and try to meet a certain goal. They can also respond to each other's discussion posts. So I always require students to respond to each other because that gives them a chance to really analyze and compare their responses from other students and learn from experiences. But I don't just say reply on a post. I have to set some guidelines and also give them some ideas. So I say you can ask a question to clarify an idea. You can agree with them and explain why. You can disagree with them. So it's not like you have to agree with your classmate all the time. We all have different opinions. So you can disagree as long as it's respectful and it's you can back it up with your experiences. You can also add on to the discussion if you have another example of what they're talking about, so we can really help to expand on that topic or issue. And then we can also do student-to-student interaction through synchronous discussions during live sessions, using the chat box as we all are doing, and breakout sessions, which we will get to do later on. So this is a rundown of the 3 types of interactions in the online courses. And next, let's take a look at components of online courses. So we have instructional design, learning materials, assessment process, and culturally relevant content. So we're going to go through each of these in more detail. I actually have a checklist that you can follow if you like to take a look at what could be effective. So firstly, for the instructional design, are students able to easily navigate learning materials in the course? So we want to make sure that they can access things easily. They're not like trying to find things that they're looking for. We want to make sure it's all in one place. Next is the content and assessments appropriate for the grade level. So we want to make sure that they're not too difficult or too easy for students to use. Are there sufficient instructions given for students to complete assignments and activities? So sometimes when students are unsure about instructions, they don't know what to do and they won't really do well. So we want to make sure we have good instructions for them to see what exactly is expected. Are the materials logically sequenced, and is there a consistent pattern in the organization and structure? So when we have a module or a folder for the week, we want to make sure we keep it consistent every time. If you have a information folder, you want to make sure that it's always in the same place for that week. If it's in the beginning of one week, it should be in the beginning of another week as well. Is the design of the course visually appealing? So we want to make sure that it does look pretty accessible for them. And of course, this will depend on the grade level that you're teaching. In some courses or learning management systems, there's no way to really be creative, but I have seen examples of teachers who have used emojis, for example, for kindergartners to be able to really show them pictures of what the folder contains. And then we don't want to have any clutter or random folders that are empty. Our expectations and due dates provided for the course activity. So each assignment should have a due date, and it should be visible so they know when to look for or when to complete the assignment by. And lastly, do they know how to ask for help? So sometimes there's a help lounge or parking lot where students can ask questions in a discussion forum so that their peers can answer, or if they have the same question, the teacher can clarify things all at the same time. You can also provide links to the help page for a learning management system. So I know Blackboard has a resource for students to look at if they need help with certain things. So here's an example of a getting started page for an online course. This is to provide students with guidance on where to begin and what to do next, because at first it may seem overwhelming to see everything in one place. So we want them to know where to get started. You can also include an introduction discussion forum so students can get to know each other and really build relationships. So we can encourage that they communicate with each other and require them to post on another person's discussion. You can also discuss yourself about your instructor page so they can know more about you and have some course technical requirements. So if there's a certain program that they need, they can be able to have that ready before they start doing assignments. And then a typical module of what an online course could look like. So this is an example of how it's laid out. Of course, your activities and assignments can change every week. You don't need to have a quiz every week, but we should keep the general flow the same. So we do need to place the information in the same order so that they have some sense of consistency. So in this case, they have the module 1, introduction, which is the title of the module. I also like putting the dates so that they know this is when it begins and this is when it ends. We also have the overview and instructions, which is of course the first thing they'll need to look at. The content includes a quiz, assignment, and discussion. So these are just examples of what you can include, but the main point is to make it clear and have a flow of what they should do first, next, and last. All right, and next we're going to look at appropriate learning materials. So once students start taking the online course and they begin to not really find it to be engaging, they might be less motivated to, keep doing the assignments. So we want to make sure that these learning materials are engaging. Firstly, do they actually match the learning outcomes of the course? So everything should be connected, like what Mike discussed with the backward design. We want to make sure that everything matches the learning outcomes of the course and that there's a purpose for why they're doing a certain thing. So we should never just give an assignment for busy work. Just like in a classroom, we should have an end goal and know why it's important for them to complete it. So here's another way of rephrasing what I said earlier about engagement. Are the course materials interactive and do they keep the learners engaged? So when we use a variety of content, it helps to really promote learning and help them understand the subject better. We want to make sure the courses have presentations and visuals with images, videos, charts, and graphs, because a lot of our students are visual learners. If they just see text for the whole time, they might lose interest and they might not be able to really focus on what's being said. Is the content varied to accommodate students that learn in different ways? So we do have very diverse classrooms with students with learning needs, English language learners, and students with different interests and learning styles. So we want to make sure we have a variety of content that really allows us to meet their needs, provides opportunities for them to interact, and also tailor the level of difficulty in different ways so that they can learn with different abilities. So other examples of content that you can use are videos and audio clips and hands-on practice. So earlier I mentioned simulations where students can really see the application of real-world skills through simulations. Okay, and then we're moving on to the assessment process. So do the assessments measure the learning outcomes of the course? We want to make sure that the course does include high standards of rigor because we want to challenge them intellectually and really get their critical thinking skills working. So that's very important for allowing us to measure their understanding of the topic. Are the assessments user-friendly and again, appropriate difficulty level? So we don't want to make the assessments too difficult, especially if this course is completely online, because then we don't want them to have a really difficult time completing things on their own. We want to make sure that what they learned in class can be directly used to complete the assignments. And then we want to make sure that there are instructions on how the assessments can be submitted. So if you want it in a certain type of file, then you can let them know, please submit this as a PDF, please title it in this way, and then they would know. And if you keep that throughout the whole course, they should be habitually able to do that every single time. Are there exemplars that show students what a finished product looks like? So when we have exemplars, they can really show students what they're expected to do. Just be careful on using them too much, because then, we don't want them to just copy what was shown, but just give an example. And rubrics can also help them understand the different components you're looking for. So always be transparent about what you're trying to do. Does the course instructor provide timely and constructive feedback to learners? So when we have that type of feedback, they know what they did well and what they can improve on. So feedback should be constructive, which means that they should be able to improve their performance by correcting their errors. So after that, and the last component is culturally relevant content. So especially when we are in our specific areas in a specific context, some issues and scenarios from other places won't be as relevant or applicable to where we are. So we want to consider our student population, where we're at, the demographics, and the issues that are going on, so that we can provide them with connections about the content. Other ways you can do that are to tailor the language, compatibility, and design aspects of your course to suit your learners. So this also goes back to the different grade levels. When we have a lower elementary classroom, we can add more visuals and pictures because some students, especially at the lower age groups, might not be able to read yet. So we want to make sure that they can access this information maybe through the emojis or the pictures that we use. Okay, so those were the 4 components of an online course. And I also would like to talk more about tips for presenting information. So I know that we use PowerPoints and Google Slides often to present our information. So these are just some of the tips that I find to be the best way to present information. We want to make sure it's up to date and relevant. Of course, we update it throughout the years that we teach, that it's presented in chunks and it's varied. So if we're just talking the whole time, and Paul will talk more about this, but if we're talking the whole time, then of course we don't want to we don't want to lose their engagement. So we want to have varied ways to get the information across, do some polls, some discussions. And number 3, text is accompanied with images for examples, and the appearance. So we want to make sure the design is consistent and that the text is easy to read, so that our students are not squinting or having a hard time getting the information to them. So tips for assessing our online courses. As we talked about earlier, continuous assessment can really help us determine what are the problem areas in our course, how can we perform better. So what do you think we should definitely look at? How a course is looking like from the perspective of our learners. How do the students interact with the content? Is there some places where there's uncertainty that we should change? And of course, then we'll be able to change that up for improvement. Then we want to analyze questions we receive from students. So if there's a certain assignment that you're getting, countless questions on, then we can take a look at what can be done to improve. Maybe the directions need to be more clear. Maybe we need to provide more examples. So that could be a way to assess as well. And lastly, getting feedback about the course from our learners. So we should think about having an evaluation form at the end of the course or even throughout the course so that we can improve it and see what can be done to make the learning experience even better. So I'm going to show you an example of a student evaluation survey. Feel free to use any of the questions that are presented here. You don't have to use all of them. Maybe focus on one area at the end of a quarter and then implement those changes. And then you can move on to another area instead of everything at one time. So here's a sample. So I just have a Likert scale with agree and disagree. The teacher explained concepts clearly. The course assessments measure the objectives, learning outcomes of the course. And of course, you want to tailor this to what grade level you're teaching. The material was presented at an appropriate pace. Requirements for the course were reasonable. The teacher communicated clearly with me. The teacher provided me with help when I needed it. It was easy for me to talk to the teacher. The course was well organized and consistent. Instructional materials used in the course contributed to my learning. The course was intellectually challenging. So this is where you can find out how difficult the assignments might have been. And you can also add a space for them to comment on specific things. So if there was an assignment that they had a hard time on in particular, you could find out if you asked about that sort of question. The teacher was prompt in returning feedback for assignments. I would recommend this course to other students. And then on the bottom here, I have examples of short answer questions that you can ask for more details on their experiences. So you can ask about their strength, what they think the strengths and weaknesses were about the learning material. So maybe they thought the textbook was great, or maybe they thought some of the readings were unnecessary. You can look through your responses, and if there's a majority of students who are saying a certain thing, then you could consider making that change. Commenting on the assignments and exams, how difficult they were, if they were too length, if there were too many, if they were useful, and what if they were actually good at testing their understanding of the content. You can also have them provide additional comments about improving the course, the most favorite thing they liked, the least favorite, and any topics they would like to learn more about. So that's basically everything about the course evaluation part. There's countless different rubrics, and Mike showed you one earlier about evaluating courses. I showed you some components. The important thing is just to see what works for students, and when something isn't really doing well, we know that we can change it and make it better. So that's all for my section. I'll go ahead and hand it over to Paul. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ria. Let me get my share screen going. Oops. Sorry, I hit the wrong button. Where am I? All right, so can we see my presentation?
Looks good.
Awesome. All right, so it looks like Mike and Ria basically did all of my parts. So I think we're done here. We can wrap it up. No, thank you guys very much. Thank you, Mike and Ria. A lot of good information there, a lot to take in, right? Now I'm doing assessing your lesson delivery. So Mike's part focuses on building the lesson. Ria's part focuses on the content in the course, as well as, you know, other details to help make the course effective. My part focuses on delivering your lesson. So you create the lesson, you build the content, you put in the course, and now the live lesson delivery, right? So first up, can you guys do me a favor, everyone? Can you find your feedback panel? It should be somewhere at the bottom with the smiley emoji face, right? With the plus, and click on the, I'm sorry, let me see. Click on, I'm trying to find my, oh, there we are. Click on the check mark, the green check mark. Can we all do that? All right, I see 5 people have clicked on the green check mark. Awesome. Any more? Can I get more check marks? All right, thank you very much. So you all basically agreed to donate $100 to my classroom's funding. We accept food stamp, we accept PayPal. All right, just checking if you got your reaction buttons all set. So my part, did I move that or did it move on its own? Man, I'm having issues. I think it's moving on its own. Okay, my part, let's reflect on this question first. If you were a student in your online or physical class, would you want to be in your class? So think about it. I'll give you about 30 seconds to think about it. Think about how you teach in your class, physically or online, but most especially focusing on the online part because this is for online lessons, right? And think about, if you were participating or a student in your class, would I want to be in this class? Would I find this class interesting? And in a few seconds, Lynette is gonna throw up a poll and then maybe just, you know, answer yes, I would, no, I wouldn't, just simple, so we can see how we feel about how we teach. All right, so because this is it's a very important question to ask ourselves. I mean, a lot of times, right, we don't really think about it, and it's a big factor because we're presenting, we want the kids to learn, we want them to make sure they're paying attention. And if we were students in our class, how would it be for us, right? And the reason why I bring this up is because, you know, it's even for my students, when I teach, I like having a lot of interaction. I'm a very interactive person, so I expect them to be paying attention and participating, right? And the reason why I also brought this up is because one of my sons is in high school, and he was in his class, right? He was having a hard time, like, Dio, why aren't you paying attention in class, right? So he's always, you know, daydreaming and phasing out. So then one time I sat in with him and I listened to his class, or most of it, right? And then as the teacher was doing his lesson, I was thinking, like, wow, do I teach like this? Is this the way it is in my class? Because my conclusion was like, man, Dio, now I can see why you phase out, because the teacher was just, you know, like putting up the PowerPoint and just reading through it, and he would just talk about whatever it is that's on the screen, but rarely does he ever take the time to ask for questions, or how's it going, or get interaction, or even comments from the students. So I know how painful that can be. Lynette, can you throw up that poll? Is it showing already, or?
All right, I ended the poll and we have 7 folks who responded, and we have 86% said yes, they would want to be in their own class that they teach. Awesome. And 14% said no.
Okay, so see, that's the thing, that sometimes we have to, you know, stop and reflect, like, how is it in my class? I know I want these kids to learn. I know I want them to pay attention. Am I providing that opportunity, right? Okay, so we're gonna move on. And the next part here is, when I plan a lesson, I break it down into 2 parts. The first part is obviously identifying the objectives, the resources, the activities, and the assessments. Then the second part is planning on how to deliver the lesson. Under normal circumstances, face-to-face classes, we don't really have to consider how we deliver the lessons. We know that it's easier to get responses and to keep students focused on when they are physically in the classroom. But if you want to ask a question, right, you could easily just look at the person or stand next to them and ask them a question. But online, it's a different case, especially since if they're behind the screen and they're not obligated to turn on their cameras, we can't really tell if they're still paying attention. So there are many things that could distract them and make them lose focus. In light of that, we need to take necessary measures to ensure that we have our own means of getting them to stay focused as well as participate. And these are the categories that I consider when I'm doing my planning for delivering a lesson. Please keep in mind that I know this is more in relation to my grade level, which is 5th grade. I know that it would be you're gonna have to take some time to think about how you would tailor it to your grade level, if it's younger students or for older students. And this is not the be-all end-all holy grail of lesson delivery design. It's greatly helped me in keeping my students engaged and increase retention. Hopefully implementing some of these strategies will benefit you and your students. My part doubles as a means of assessing your virtual lesson delivery, but also assessing student knowledge or understanding during virtual lessons. Essentially, it'll help you assess if delivery is satisfactory based on the results of the ongoing quick assessments during the lesson. And I'm going to talk more about that. So the lesson delivery attributes that I break it down into, we have here lesson content or materials, the flow design, student engagement or participation, discussions or breakout sessions, assignment quantity or duration, and surveying for retention. And a lot of these Ria and Mike already talked about, so I'm just reinforcing upon what they presented. Okay. All right. So first up, we have lesson content and materials, and I've broken it down into these categories: agenda or your schedule, your plan of action, your content and language objectives, visuals, quick engaging activities, and the last one there's more of like a tip of just being entertaining. All right. So for agenda, this one, it's a simple technique and it's very beneficial. Show the agenda so that they know what to expect. It helps them to prepare and track progress of the class. You can choose to have the agenda show the entire day or just for each subject. Additionally, the agenda helps me keep track of time or what I'm going through, right? Making sure that I'm hitting all those things that I need to go through during the lesson. Most of the time, I would ask them the agenda from yesterday to help them recall and access prior knowledge. Most of my students have shared also that they prefer to see the agenda for each subject, like what you see here. This is for reading. And they've also added to the agenda for, whenever they feel like there should be something there. Sometimes it's like Mr. Salira, can we talk about the quiz, or can we talk about the ceremony that's coming up? So I'll add that one to the agenda, and they help me keep track of what we're going through throughout the lesson. And in other situations, it's helped me streamline the flow of the agenda. So like when they're looking forward to something, say for instance, quizzes, right? In the agenda, there's a quizzes. The students are very good with like, okay, let's move on to the next one, because they just want to get to the quizzes part, right? When they see that there's something fun there, they're keeping track, making sure that I get to it and we don't skip it. So it helps keep track with everything, and it also helps everyone keep track. Okay. Here's another example. This one is for the entire day. So for reading, this is what we're going to focus on: math and grammar and science, right? Again, it's just another variation. You want to do one that's one specifically for each subject. In my case, it's I teach 5th grade, so I teach all the subjects. I have agendas for each one. I'm sure for middle school, high school, it's probably just one agenda that you're going to use for the entire day, right? Next one is content and language objective. Content and language objectives help them know or understand what are they learning about and how they would know what they have learned from the lesson, right? Keep the language for the content and language objectives simplified, something that they would understand. I know that most of the time it's worded for us adults or the teachers, right? But we want to change it so that they know or they understand what it's asking. For instance, right here it says, I can multiply fractions to solve real world related problems, right? Then your language objective is, I can explain to a partner how to multiply 2 fractions. It helps the students identify what they need to be able to do by the end of the lesson. It serves as a form of self-assessment to check for understanding, okay? Here are other examples of language objectives. So like for instance, the first one, there's students will be able to explain and use vocabulary words orally and in writing, right? And you have a few more. And here's a list of verbs that go along with building content and language objectives. So here's the speaking part, here's the listening part, the reading, and the writing part. Okay. But this, you know, it really helps the kids like understand what I need to be able to do by the end of the lesson. The next part is the visuals. And for visuals, there are things that you could incorporate into your slides to keep it interesting, right? You have photos, you have graphic organizers, different fonts, attractive colors, backgrounds, GIFs, and memes. So I put those in there just to make sure that they keep their attention. And even with my EdTech courses, right, where I'm working with adults, even them, they appreciate when I use these visual aids. Like it just gets their attention or keeps them, you know, in focus. So definitely want to put like also use different fonts or attractive colors. Even backgrounds make a big difference, you know, because if you're always putting up a white background, it's after a while it becomes like numbing, right? Like, oh, white background. You put something in there like something that has to do with the topic, and then it brings, you know, their attention. And sometimes they ask like, hey, Mr. Salira, so is it really like that? And then, you know, you're getting them to actually think about what you're presenting or what you're teaching them. So it's not just sit back and listen to me. They're starting to interact. So for visuals, again, like I said, you know, make it look interesting. Use photos, use different fonts, make it look attractive. It just really helps, you know, keep attention. Here's an example of one where I've put it's just a snippet of something that I found on the interweb for inferencing. And, you know, instead of just imagine if I only put it up in words as opposed to what you see with the nice colors and the magnifying glass and the book, it would attract attention, definitely. Here's another one again, pretty much same strategy, right? Just take a picture, put it in there in your slides. The next one I'm going to talk about is quick engaging activities. And for these activities are, you know, those easy to manage, and you can apply it to almost any lesson. It becomes your universal tool when you're delivering your lesson. So it's something that you're always going to be using to make sure that you're checking if, you know, they're engaged, or just to make sure that they keep engaged. And with these things, my students already know that I'm always going to have these small like activities where I ask them to respond, just like how I had you guys use the feedback button earlier, just like that. So, you know, I check who's still paying attention, who's active, and so on. So for the first one, for these quick engaging activities, we have quick polls, right? And I call it quick polls because there's not much, you know, setup required. I just turn it on without having the question there or the responses. And I just ask and I'll usually keep it like true or false or multiple choice, but the question is not even displayed and choices are not displayed. So they're really having to pay attention to what's the question that I ask and what are the responses so that they know which one to choose, right? And that's another way where we're like, okay, pay attention. He's going to need me to respond. And I know if a participant has or hasn't responded because I have that list that tells me this person has or hasn't responded, right? And sometimes I like to test for true understanding by making all the answer choices wrong. So they'll really think about it, right? Like instead of just choosing an answer, they'll think about it, like, wait a minute. And then somebody will turn on their microphone and say, Mr. Salira, none of the answers are correct, right? And then I say, are you sure? And then they'll go about explaining, yeah, because it's not this, because not this, and it's not this, because, and so on, right? And that's just accessing, deeper understanding. You're able to justify that all the answers are incorrect, right? So getting into the higher order thinking skills. What I like best about this feature is that I can quickly identify how many and who have gained understanding on the topic. It's difficult with the chat box because the chat box, you're going to get a bunch of people responding and you're going to be scrolling and trying to read it, right? As opposed to this one, it's nice and quick. Okay, I can see what's his answer. I can see she got it wrong, he got it wrong. So I need to, and just off the bat, when you look at the responses, you can really tell if half of your class understand, or less than half, or all of them have understood. So that really helps. I also pretend that I only see quantity and not actual responses from each student, because I want them to feel comfortable with responding. I don't want them to think like, oh man, he's gonna know my answer and feel like they don't want to respond the next time. So I just tell them, I can see if you responded, but I can't really tell what's your answer. So I keep it that way. It just makes them feel more comfortable. The next one we have, agree or disagree. That's that yes or no button, the yes that you clicked earlier, right? And it's a quick way to get response and to keep them focused, but be clever about your questions to check for automated responses, because some of them, they just like click agree or click disagree. Most of the time it's just agree without even having to think about it, right? But I'll add something like right, or I'll say something and I say right, as to make it sound like it's correct, but the answer is actually like it's wrong, right? So I can tell like, why would you agree to that one, Mike? And the answer is he's supposed to actually disagree, but he agreed. So Mike has to, like really think about, what am I going to say, right? So the next time I say something, Mike's going to make sure that he's going to pay attention. Otherwise, he'll get it wrong again, and I'm going to have to call him out. But it's quick and fast. And usually, like when I'm reading also, I'm reading to them, and then I'll just like, oh, that one sounds interesting, right? Wouldn't you guys agree? And then they hit agree or hit disagree, just to see if they're still paying attention, or if they're still, in front of the screen for that matter. My students have this, abbreviation that they use, AFK. And I learned that from them. They kept saying AFK. Hey, Ria, where are you? Are you there, Ria? And they'll type down AFK. I'm like, what's AFK? And they go, away from keyboard. Oh, so now I know. So every time, like I'll call on, Ria, are you there? And Ria, are you AFK? And then some people like agree, yes, AFK or not. All right, moving on. Raise your hand if, so this one again, there are many ways that you can use this. And the nice thing about, well, as far as Blackboard Learn is concerned, you can tell who's raised their hand first, down to the last. So, and that can be, key in sometimes, because like, for example, you want them to, all right, who wants to read? And then they'll raise their hand. All right, first person to raise their hand, you're getting it. Or who wants to try and answer this question to get a free homework pass? And then again, they'll raise their hand as quick as they can, just so they can try and answer. That's a reward, and I'm going to talk about that one later. But I would use it like, for example, I say, raise your hand if you think I'm correct, right? And then they'll raise their hand. Or if you don't want extra work today, raise your hand. And then they're raising their hand like, okay, what do I got to do, Mr. Salira? So they're always looking for ways to, get some time off from extra activities. I'll also say like, raise your hand if you're ready to begin. So when we transition from one subject to another, right? Say, okay, get this one out, get your notebooks, your pencil, raise your hand when you're ready. And then they'll raise their hand. Okay, I can see Lynette's ready. Thank you, Lynette, for being ready. And then you see the rest of them just raising their hands, right? Raise your hand if you're paying attention. And then I'll go like 3, 2, 1, boom. And then all the hands go up. And then some of them, oh, we have 5 people who are AFK. Are you AFK? And then they'll raise their hand immediately, right? But again, these are all, quick and very engaging activities, just to make sure that they're staying on focus. We have mics on 3. In this one, they turn on their microphones and they all respond. So it sounds like havoc on my end, but with Blackboard Learn, I can see when they turn on their microphones, and I can see when there's, what is it called? Like when they're talking. So I can tell who's turned on their microphone and started speaking, right? So I'll say something like, okay, mic's on 3. A noun is, and then I go, ready? 1, 2, 3, and then they'll turn on their microphone and they'll all say the answer. A noun is a person, place, or thing, and it just sounds crazy on my end. But I'm looking at the microphones and I can tell, oh, Eloise, you didn't turn on your microphone. You want to share with us what's a noun? So Eloise has to take the time to say what's a noun. So, they're always paying attention. And then this one also ties in with PSYOP strategies of the turn on talk, right? So I do a lot of PSYOP in my class, and when I talk about something, and then I'll tell them, okay, turn to a partner and tell them what's the first step in dividing with decimal, right? And then they'll turn on their talk. So this is almost the same thing, but instead of talking to each other, they're talking to me. So it's good for accessing, higher order thinking skills. All right, next one is ask me a question. And for this one, it's simple. It's either they want to have me clarify on something, and if they don't have any questions, then I'll try and play like a genius and I say, guys, you can't ask me a question that I wouldn't know the answer to, right? And then they'll try, they're like, okay, so Mr. Saya, and then they'll ask me a question and I'll get the answer. So they think that they're trying to get me wrong, but in reality, I'm checking for their understanding. And sometimes I'll fool them, like they'll ask me a question and I'll give them the wrong answer. Oh, Mr. Salila, you're wrong. I'm like, no, I'm not. And then I'll actually say the correct answer, like, right. And then they'll be like, oh yeah, you got it right. Or I'll play that reverse psychology and I'll have them tell me the answer. So now I'm not the one that's sharing the correct answer. They're the ones that's sharing the correct answer, sharing their understanding with each other. No? PSYOP. Now the flow design, this one, it's what Ria basically mentioned with designing the course, but same thing within your lesson delivery, right? Usually we have laid out PowerPoints and stuff, but you want to keep it so that you want to get consistency. So every time you have your presentation, there are some things that are always there so that they know what to expect. Always the same routine with lessons, so students know what's going to come next in just about every lesson. Like every time we start, there's going to be the agenda, right? And then they know that every time it gets to the end of the lesson, there's going to be an exit ticket, right? So they're always expecting that, because they've even asked me like, Mr. Saya, you didn't give us an exit ticket. Oh yeah, you're right. So they're the ones that's telling me that, this is what you missed. You need to give us what you missed. Or even like making sure that every time you have a lesson, right, you're delivering a lesson, there's going to be a discussion or a breakout session. So they know there's going to be a breakout session. They have to pay attention, because when they get into that breakout session, they're going to have to share with each other, and they don't want to feel uncomfortable with, I don't know what to say. So I got to make sure that I'm really paying attention here. And again, also with like in the breakout sessions, I'm going to talk about it later, but they help each other in there. Consistent visuals, including backgrounds or icons. That way, it always relates to a particular idea. Like they see this icon that says it's a quiz. This one says it's a review. This one tells you that it's the agenda, right? So keeping it consistent helps them stay on track and they know how the flow is going to go. Student engagement or participation. These are conventions for attention, but more for recalling and promoting retention. Methods for participation or contribution, because we want them to be a part of it, right? It's not just here, listen to me, and then I'm gonna send you off and you're gonna do your activity. We want them to always interact and engage. And I have quite a few on this one, so I'm not gonna try to go too long. I have a habit of talking too much, so guys, let me know if I'm talking too much, okay? First one is Jamboard, or just any whiteboard, right? Here they can answer questions, they can draw, they can solve a math problem that you post up, and then, like, for example, okay guys, I'll write up a math problem, and then I want everybody to write their answer everywhere else around the question, right? And then I say go, and then they'll write it down, and then I'll erase it, start with another one, do the same thing again. So they're interacting instead of just listening or, you know, typing in the chat. Jamboards allow for more organized participation, because you can, you know, set up different boards. Like, okay, all the girls, you're on this board, all the boys, you're on this board, or group 1, you're here, group 2, and so on. And you can go through all of them when they're done and share what they've given. A simpler method would be if you don't want to always switch back and forth, because sometimes they are on a device where switching back and forth is very difficult. So a simpler method would be within your presentations, just throw in a blank slide, and they can use their annotation tools to write. So like Blackboard, for instance, if you show Blackboard Learn, if you throw on the whiteboard, and you want to switch back to your presentation, it takes quite a while. So I'll just throw in a blank slide in there and have them annotate, but then it's actually, I'm still actually on the presentation instead of going to the whiteboard. Next one, we have bump reading. And I was telling Mike and Ria, I think Lynette also, that I learned this one from my student teacher that I just had. Very interesting. I've always had a difficult time getting students to read for me. It's always the same kids over and over. So I was talking to my student teacher and saying, man, we got to find a way to get these kids to, want to read. And he came up with this bump reading. So how it works is I'll pick somebody first. Like I'll say, okay, Lynette, you read first, and then bump somebody. So Lynette will read, right? And then she'll say, okay, bump Ria. So now it's Ria's turn to read. And it's very, honestly, it's the way I see it, I was thinking it wasn't gonna really work, right? But it worked. I guess because it's not me who's asking them to read, it's another classmate who's asking them to read. So, they got chosen, and it's kind of like their response, you gotta respond, you gotta read. And to make it more comfortable for them, especially with struggling readers, you can say like, okay guys, just turn it on, read just that one sentence and you're good. Okay, you can stop from there. And after a while, they get the hang of it, and they don't just choose one sentence to read. Sometimes then you find yourself in a situation where, can we do bump? I want to bump somebody to read, and everybody's like, yeah, they hit agree. Let's do bump reading. So this one is very effective in getting them to participate in the reading part. No, you don't want them to always be listening to you. You want them to listen to others also, and it forces them to stay engaged and participate. Somebody's gonna bump me, I'm gonna have to pay attention. Next one, we have PSYOP strategies. PSYOP is more for like, face-to-face, but there are some things that you could do online that still incorporate these PSYOP strategies. Like for instance, have a student take over parts or parts that you feel or they feel that they can explain, right? Like, all right, who wants to explain this one? And then they'll jump in and they'll explain. And now you're not teaching, they're the ones that's teaching, right? So not only is the person showing what they know, their classmates are learning from another student instead of just from the teacher. You can do PSYOP in the chat. So what you do is you give a prompt, then have them review which do they think is the best response. So you give a prompt and then they type the response in the chat, and then they go over it all, and then have one student share, like, okay, who would like to share which response they feel is the best response to that question or that prompt. And then they'll say, I like Mike's response because it fits, or, you know, and they'll start to explain. So again, this is where they share their responses. They're reading everybody's responses. That's the evaluation part. And then they're drawing their own conclusions and justifying. Another one is you could break them up into pairs and have their parents share. Person one tells what is, like, for example, you'd say, okay, you two, or when you jump into, when I hit the breakout session, person one is going to tell person two what is a fungus. And then person two tells how are they useful in the life cycle. And then, like, wait, how do we know who's going to be person one or person two? I'll tell you what, when you get logged in, the first one to raise their hand is going to be person one. And I usually make the first person's prompt easier. So they try and race to see who's going to raise their hand first. You can make it also a group of three, and the third person would be the repeater of both responses. So he'll listen to what number one says, what number two says, and then he'll reiterate, or she'll reiterate what they both said. No? So they have to really pay close attention to what they're all saying to each other. And then they can come back and share the responses. All right, next one we have, I think I have lag here, sorry. Waterfall Chat, yeah, that's the one. So in the chat, I know some of you guys are familiar with this one, but it's a simple one where they hold off, they'll type their response, right? And then you tell them, okay, on three, waterfall, 1, 2, 3, waterfall, and then they'll hit enter, and then you get all the responses there. This one, you want to make sure that, you know, they're all responding and they'll hit their chat. And it also helps you identify if which individuals may possibly not understand the objective or the question or something like that, because they haven't responded yet. And, you know, you don't want, I know that we try and discourage them from copying each other's answers and just using that again. So this one also, you can identify, because if they're just copying, they'll wait until all the chats are in there, and then they'll find which is the correct answer, and then they'll paste it in there. But in this way, you can tell, okay, so John hasn't responded yet. We find out why John hasn't responded. And if it's become a normal thing, then we start to evaluate, you know, find out what's going on, why is he not responding, or how can we help John participate more in that one. Then we have student domino. So for student domino, you choose a student to respond, and then the next person, they choose another person to respond. So it's almost like bump reading, but it's more of like bump answering, right? So I have you respond, and then you choose the next person to respond to the next question that I have, and so on and so forth. So you're not going to get to everybody, but they're going to be paying attention, because, like, hey, I'm going to get bumped. I have to pay attention. I might be next. I need to answer this question correctly. Use these activities with short, quick responses, right? Like, for example, you'd say living or non-living, and then the person answer living. Okay, sorry. And then they choose another person, or greater or less than. Which one is this fraction, a greater or less than 1, like that. And you want to train your students to use their microphones to respond early on, because if they're not used to it, it takes a while to get them used to it. After a while, though, when you get them used to it, that's the first thing, they'll hit that microphone without even raising their hand to add what they want to say. But it's a wonderful thing. Next one is more polls, right? Just use polls. Keep throwing the polls out there, because it really helps with trying to identify who knows and who doesn't know. No need to post the poll questions. Just ask and assign a response to each letter, and then they'll choose their answer. Rewards, students love the rewards. Like you offer the rewards for participation. Those who perfect the exit ticket, you don't need to assign for, you don't need to do the assignment for tomorrow. So they're always trying to pay attention, because exit ticket is gonna relate to what we've learned. If I can't answer the exit ticket, then there goes my shot for, you know, getting a free pass on the assignment. What else? Did I miss anything for this one? So, you know, the students always look forward for the reward. So have some kind of reward, and the reward relates to the participation. They're always going to stay engaged and stay participated. Like, even for example, okay, the top 3 people who answer the most questions today or responds to me today, you get a free pass from this assignment, and so on. And this is the one I was talking about. It's just more of a tip, but be entertaining, right? You can use some of these strategies to be entertaining to them. Change your tone or mimic a voice. Like, I'll say something and then I'll pretend I'm like one of the students. But Mr. Salira, you said, and then, you know, it keeps them entertained. So they're paying attention. Hype them up. Use different accents. If you know how to do a French accent, use your French accent, right? Or use the local accent. Use reverse psychology, where you're telling them that I'm not so smart, and then they prove that you are. Or, you know, they say the correct answer, and then I say, oh, you got the wrong answer. The correct answer is, and I'll actually repeat what they said, and they say, wait, I just said that, Mr. Said that was my answer. Are you sure? So, you know, they're really paying attention to that. What else? We have use their generation's language. They have their own jargon, like my sons, they say, instead of I'm not lying or for real, they say no cap. I don't even know how does no cap relate to that, but they say no cap. So I'll say something and I say no cap, and then somebody on the chat throws in, oh, Mr. Said said no cap, and then they'll say no cap. They'll ask me no cap, right? They're always listening. Point to the camera, right? Like, hey, you, I know you're not listening. Look, turn to me. Are you looking at me? And then, you know, they all think, oh, they think I'm talking to them. Use your emotions mask or expression. Sometimes I'll show them like, I'm really sad or I'm upset. Like, don't you dare say that, or, you know, just so that you keep it real, no? And use props. Sometimes I'll take a sticky note, right? I'll write something important on it and I'll stick it on my head. And then you're like, Michelle, you got a sticky note on your head. Oh yeah, that's to remind me. And then I just move forward in the camera and then they read it for me, right? But it really does, to be entertaining, it really does keep them engaged. I even have parents who tell me, I listen in to your lessons because you're pretty funny and pretty entertaining. Like, oh, that's nice to know that you're listening too. I hope you learned a lot. All right, so moving on. Am I doing good with time? I feel like I'm talking too long already. I'm good. All right.
We were going to break around 11, and so that's like 2, 3. So you got plenty of time to wrap up.
Okay, sorry. Discussions and breakout sessions, always have these. You know, it's very important. Everyone must respond either verbally or in a chat, and you can use whole group discussions or breakout discussions. What do I have here? Use prompts that elicit response or are more focused on the objectives. Why do you think it was a good idea for Bobby to leave the house? And, you know, that's more of an explanation. Explain how would you multiply 2 fractions. So when they get into that breakout group, they're talking about it, helping each other. And it's beneficial for the person who didn't really get it the first time around. They're hearing it from a classmate, and hopefully, you know, they can explain it in a way to each other that makes sense. And it has happened. I'll explain something and then I don't get it, Mr. Saya. And then can somebody explain to Camille? And then Walter will explain and then Camille gets it. Oh, that's how I said it. You know, so it's really strange how they think that I said it a different way. But the discussion and the breakout groups are very important for assessing whether your lessons went well or not. Jump in there, listen to them, hear the responses, ask them to share what they just said. Or you can also break them into groups. Like, for example, you have a set of students who you know need extra guidance. You would put them all together, join their discussion group, and give them their prompts so that they can start to discuss with each other, right? That's a, what's that word? A kind of intervention strategy. And then assignment quantity and duration. This one mainly is like, you really have to think about how much you're giving them, because you know, when you're done, for instance, our school, we go for like 3 hours online, and then we expect them to go in again online after class to do their assignments. So, you know, they've already gone through so much time online. You want to make sure that you are very conscious about how much work you give them. You don't want it to, you know, burn them out. They've already been there the entire live session. Now they're going to go on and do their assignments. So, and you can even break it down so that your assignments are within your lesson. You know, they don't know that they're doing this the practice, but it's actually within the lesson, and it's taking away from their activity after the synchronous session. And focus it more on like the core of the lesson instead of so many different things. You just want to focus on that one thing, and you want them to focus on more of like the explanation part instead of the answer. You know, instead of just a bunch of, what is it, multiple choice, you give them response questions where they have to explain something. Use programs. I know Ria mentioned this one where she says, teach them how to submit their assignments. So use programs that make it simple to submit their assignment. You know, give them the opportunity also to, instead of having to type stuff down, they can just easily write it down or match it. Or in some cases, for some of my students who aren't so, you know, fluent with typing, I'll say, record your voice and give me the answer from there. So, you know, you have them participating. It's not the best way that you want them to, but being that it's an online class, you know, you have to go with the flow sometimes, right? Give them that accommodation. What else? Consider that they're also on their own, so it makes it more difficult if you're not around to ask you questions like, can you clarify on this activity? How do I do this? So keep it simplified. No, simplify the activity, keep it so it's focused on the core and more in the explanation so that they don't burn themselves out. All right, and then surveying retention. This is where I use my breakout groups, my polls, my exit tickets. It helps me easily identify, you know, if most of my students understand or which one of them have a hard time understanding, and then I, you know, change it so that I can either, do I have to go back and teach it again, or I'm good to move on to the next one and then just provide extra intervention for the ones who need help. But for the most part, I use my breakout groups. The polls and the exit tickets really helps me identify, and they're really quick, helps me identify if my lesson has gone well. If I go into the breakout groups, they're able to explain to me, able to answer some of my questions. It lets me know they got it, right? Same thing with the polls. Most of the answers are correct. Looks like they got it. Exit ticket, you're getting it perfect. They got it. And if they don't, that's when you have to think about what happened. What did I do that didn't go so well that I can improve to make it better? So if I have to go back over it again or for the next lesson, so be it. You know? So in a nutshell, your lesson delivery, is it designed to effectively keep students engaged? Does it allow for participation? And does it help clarify ideas and check for understanding? All right. Thank you very much, guys. I'm sorry if I burned your ears off. I think it's time for break, and then we'll go into discussion groups. Right, Mike?
Yes, it is. If you can just press the play button there and the timer will start.
Will do.
Oh. Welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you got a nice quick stretch there. Let me go ahead. So you've heard from us. Now we'd like to hear a little from you. So we're going to, oh, let me get to the next slide here. There we go. We're going to go into breakout rooms here. And what we're going to do is we're going to break you into 3 groups of 4. And then you'll have a facilitator in each room as well. Either me or Paul or Ria will also be in one of the rooms with you. And let me put the Google Doc in the chat. So when you get to your breakout room, which we'll do just in a second here. So if you want to go ahead and open this document and have it at the ready somewhere. When you get there, elect one person to take notes. Not everyone has to take notes, and you'll know which group you're in, 1, 2, or 3. And then just if there's any points that you'd like to share in your discussion, you can put them on this document. And then when we come back, we'll be able to quickly see and then maybe have a quick discussion on the things that people said related to the prompt. And the prompt, once again, is how do you assess your own virtual lessons? And if you aren't teaching virtually, no worries. Just feel free to share your own general approaches to how you assess your lessons, right? So this is just an opportunity. You've heard from myself and Ria and Paul about different ideas for how to assess your own teaching, your own lessons. And now we can kind of learn from each other as well. And it's organic. So if you want to ask a question or you're thinking about something or you want to share something else in the breakout group, that's perfectly okay. It's just talk story time. There's no rules and regulations other than to kind of get to know you a little bit and your ideas and hear from you. We'll go about 25 minutes in the breakout room. We'll put a reminder that'll come kind of flash on your screen when it's about time. And then just a few minutes to share, everyone to share. And then after that, we'll finish up the workshop. So everybody good there? I put in the link. There's the prompt. Once again, how do you assess your own lessons? And we're ready to go. All right, Lynette.
All right, opening all the rooms.
I was counting down and then it changed. I was 5. Wait, what happened?
I hope you had enough time for your session.
Actually, we were done, so that was perfect. Let me share that document again. I gotta make sure I got the right one. And then we can see what people said. All right, here. Okay, I got it open now. Share it now. All right, that's it. All right, cool. So anybody from group 1 want to just kind of go over what they discussed there, go over the bullets?
Okay, hi everyone. My name's Norma. I'm the group representative for group 1. And we had Amara Manzana, myself, Ms. Dora Jean Ferris in the group, Ms. Jacqueline Balahaja, and our what is it, the person in charge of our group, or our moderator? Our moderator was Ms. Ria. So through the discussions, we kind of said, yeah, we kind of use all the elements that were mentioned during the different, here and there, different tools such as graphic organizers, Jamboard, Pear Deck. A lot of us, Ms. Dora Jean, because of, and Amada, because of the pandemic, and we were using Google Classroom, and it was easy. Students were familiar with it online. So we used a lot of Google Forms, group projects, and Amada had mentioned, because the biggest difficulty that we had being out of the classroom was conducting our student labs. And because that's all hands-on, you know, they have their own little business to take care of in terms of a retail business. But the students, her senior students, really kicked that up a notch, and they are actual managers for this, what we call a small business enterprise. And they came up with ways to actually assess their workers, right? They're juniors, they're workers. So by the time they're seniors, they're actual supervisors in the store. So they came up with ways, because they're more technically savvy and have been using more of these technical tools and more familiar than we are. They actually came up with some really great online skills assessments for their workers. They did videos of the skills that they performed, like how do you handle, demonstrate on video, how do you handle a different customer, how to count back change to a customer, how to do proper merchandising in your own brick and mortar store, etc. We also discussed surveys that students fill out in terms of how they feel about the lesson and so forth. And one of the things that Amara had mentioned that I personally like, because I kind of did the same thing that she used to do. And before, in a normal class, we would do reflections at the end of the year, right? This is to hear back from the student anonymously. They write it down in their notebook, or they turn it in, and they can really tell us, Miss, before I leave you, this is what you should do, or this is how I feel, or this is how I've learned. But she took that up to do it once per quarter, because really, you know, the reality of the situation is that you really don't have that one-on-one with your students. You know, you do your 15 minutes of class, and then boom, they got to go to their next online class, and you're kind of like, oh, okay, and you're doing the next class. So one of the things she mentioned was this reflection, because it gave her a great deal of understanding of what's really going through that student's life, that student's well-being, so to speak, earlier. And it's done more often, once per quarter, and gave her a lot of information and feedback, because they're really open when they know that this is being addressed to just you and nobody else. And so, yeah, I think I'd like to implement that as well for this school year. That's it. That's our group. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else from group one want to add anything additional? All right, great. Thank you, group number one, for the great summary there. And we'll go over to group number two, which I guess I'm elected, somehow self-elected for doing the summary, as if you haven't heard enough from me, but that's me. So, and that was Lucia, Marcia, Melissa, and Monica. If I missed anyone, I think that's right, put it in the chat. Good, we had a very nice discussion. So some of the things that people really pointed out as important was getting real-time feedback, how, you know, the technology really allows for that very strongly, using Pear Deck to keep them engaged and doing polls, having surveys that they can do that can be done at the end of class, just, you know, like, and exit tickets were another one that was mentioned. Providing activity during the breaks, right? So that was one of the strategies to kind of keep them engaged and take a mind break. I mentioned in one of the other previous workshops, and individual, I think it was Marcia, apologies if I got the wrong person, that was talking about the activity. Go Noodle If you haven't seen Go Noodle or gone to that website, there's tons of different activities that you can do with students for both their social, emotional learning and just kind of keep them active and doing stuff as well. So that's a good strategy. People like Jamboard and Flipgrid, I think that was mentioned in group one as well. And then also appreciative of having the guidelines, right? Especially for some people that are helping to coordinate other teachers or mentor them or train them. Just having the power of having a list of recommendations that you can say, you know, here's some important things to think about while you're planning and delivering your lessons, rather than just, you know, saying in general, oh, make sure you do this, make sure you do that. It's really nice to have that. People mentioned the importance of keeping communications ongoing because you just don't want to miss any students. So having those different ways, and it, you know, it doesn't all have to be within Zoom because, you know, maybe they couldn't get a connection or maybe they were not engaged, but just keeping the communications channel open so as not to miss anyone. We had a language teacher, I think, teaching Chamorro and how difficult that is to do online. And so, you know, what are some interaction strategies? What are some ways of making students feel comfortable, making sure that you can assess them, you know, using recordings as mentioned, so that students can use the video to, you know, practice their pronunciation and other things, using Nearpod for interaction, and it has a lot of capabilities of it. Exit tickets were mentioned again, Kahoot. And then we had a librarian in the group, I think that was Melissa, that talked about using book reviews as a way of getting more books into the library, but also on getting students not only to reflect on the book, but to recommend. And we talked about, that's kind of similar to what Paul was saying about the bump technique, that sometimes it's stronger when the students are saying to each other, hey, you should read this or you should do this, than when it's coming from the teacher, or it's coming, you know, it's coming from the top, right? It's them doing it. And she actually had a collection that I thought was interesting of book reviews over many years, so that you can actually kind of see what students were interested in at this time and what they're interested in now, right? And do that kind of comparison there. So thank you to Lucia, Marcia, Melissa, and Monica. And if I missed anything or misrepresented anything, please jump in if anybody from group 2 has anything they would like to add or correct. All right, great. Then we will move on. Great job, team 2. Yes, we will move on to group number 3.
Okay, so we didn't establish a spokesperson, so I'll be the spokesperson. And it seems like we're the smallest of the groups. We only had, there were only 4 of us in there, and then Eloise jumped in. Man, you guys weren't fair with the distribution there. So, you know, we just sat back, relaxed, sang to each other, didn't do much. Just kidding. So Samoa is just preparing, right, to transition into remote learning, just in case, because they're still enjoying the traditional classroom, right? They don't have to do the social distancing or limit the student count. So it's wonderful there. We should all move to Samoa. Keep it like that. Yvonne shared about, you know, students, ghost student issues where, you know, they're logged on, but they're not really there. They're not participating. So, you know, and I'm pretty sure that most of us have, you know, experienced that with the online, right? And she mentioned how she used, or she's going to use Pear Deck or is using, or is going to use Pear Deck or Nearpod to reinforce attention. You know, throw up some sections where it would provide for discussion or reviewing over material. She mentioned how she really appreciates the breakout group, where she breaks them out and the kids have to discuss amongst each other, you know, the things that they learn. clarifying things or questioning, and she would go in and listen to each one. How are they? How's the discussion going, right? And just jump in if she needs to intervene and stuff. Leora mentioned that she uses the Elliott tool, Elliott evaluation tool. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but she mentions even for for the whole PSS district, they use the Elliott tool. So it's divided into categories where the admin steps in to review your class if you're offering or implementing these different aspects of within your classroom, like equitable learning environment, high expectation environment, supportive learning, active learning, progress monitoring, and there were also the new one, the well-managed learning environment and the digital learning environment. She explained how she used that one as her guide to develop her classroom, right? The physical classroom, as well as even using it in the same sense to develop her digital classroom. And that's how she can identify if her development is going the right way. Am I providing this one? Are my students doing this, right? So it's just a checklist, the rubric letting her know, like, yeah, I'm doing that. I think I'm doing great. But she also mentioned how, you know, she would appreciate to do more of the interactive stuff, because and I understand where she's coming from, where admin tells us, okay, you got to do it this way. And even Yvonne mentioned how they're telling their staff, you got to use this program and no other program, right? But she mentioned how she would want to have things a different way, so there's more interaction within the students amongst them, instead of just, you know, getting instructions just from her. You know, how get the kids to feel free talking amongst each other, but also stepping in and making sure that they're all within, you know, on track and keeping up with the lesson. There's some notes there in the bottom. Can you scroll up a bit, Mike, or scroll down? Sorry. So we have distance education platforms include delivery and access, control, interaction, symbolic or audiovisual characteristics of the medium, social presence created by the medium, human machine interface. So basically what it's saying is just that, you know, ways where we show that we're people, you know, we're interacting as people and not just like, I'm a robot teacher and this is what you need to know, listen, and then do the activity, kind of, you know, in that kind of sense. Would you like to be a student? She brought up that, you know, she thought about it and says, would I want to be a student in my own classroom? I think, you know, it brought up the question of, I do, but I kind of like want to change some things too, right? So, and I was mentioning how, yes, I agree. Admin does tell us to do these things. You got to follow this protocol. This is what we're supposed to do. Make sure you do it that way. But then again, you know, we're the ones in the classroom. We know what we're dealing with. And sometimes we got to do what we need to do to get where we want to get to, right? Also, like we talked about how sometimes you're doing something this year and everything goes wonderful. You do the same strategy the next year and nothing is working, right? So got to be flexible with learning new things, especially with the digital age, where it's like, it almost seems like it's every day they're developing something new, something better, right? So you got to be good with learning new things and taking them on and see how you can use them in your profession. And that's pretty much it. Thank you very much. Leora or Yvonne or Israel, if you wanted to add anything, go for it.
I just wanted to add that before this module started, I wanted to keep in mind that we're all here for different purposes. My purpose is to learn something from here and take it back to where I work and make sure that I can use it well to better my instructional design. So I know that just the ending of the year, I get reviewed by my principal, and I just thought of, we're talking about virtual assessment. Let me pull up what my boss is expecting of me as well. And as you guys were going through your presentations, I was kind of checking off my Elliott list here and going, okay, these are things that I can actually use. I can better my learning environment through this and this. And so that's what I'm getting out of these modules, is to be able to take it and use it to what is already existing expectations for me in my workplace. And then researching what other big picture distant education platforms look like. It's 6 fancy words for what you guys have taught us today. So I think I'm learning a lot. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Leora.
Yes, thank you for that. That's very appreciative. And I think that you're right, that different people have different reasons for whether it's personal or it's related to going back and sharing or improving, or you're getting assessed. And so it's wonderful that you found something that fits with your particular needs as well. And just a wealth of, so let me put the big picture here again, although I can't fit it all in one screen, but just great conversations in just a short amount of time. So wonderful. So thank you for contributing, for thinking, for reflecting, and for sharing with each other, because that's equally important as to, just hearing from the trainer, whatnot as well, because we can learn well from each other as well. So thank you so much for that. And we just have a few minutes here left, so let me go ahead and wrap up so that you can get on your way in the time that we promised in the workshop schedule. So some wrapping thoughts, just try it out, try some performance assessment techniques, reflect. I think if you get anything out of the workshop into, what can I do actively to engage in this area of evaluating, assessing my own virtual lessons, just reflect on something, whatever that something is, right? Whether it's a rubric, whether it's a thought, whether it's a plan, whether it's just thinking about what your students thought or your lesson design. It's just thinking about what it is that you do and how you can do it better, right? I mean, that's really it in a nutshell. Reflect on any data that you get from your students, and then have a personal assessment plan as well as a student one, right? So however that looks, it looks like in some institutions that's formalized in some way, that's great. But if not, maybe you have your own personal one, as Paul was saying, we kind of know what we need to do and where we have to go. So maybe that's part of that planning, right? And then we can take questions if you have any here in the last couple of minutes that we have. But in addition to that, I wanted to point out that you have access to these slides. It does have all of the references of anything that we referred to. So if you want to do a deeper dive into some of the things that we were discussing, like the quality matters or the competencies or assessment approaches, you can do that. That the images that we use are freely distributed. That's another important thing to consider in education, is the kinds of pictures and images that you use and getting appropriate agreement for them. And then there's the feedback form, which I believe Eloise or Lynette can put in there again as well. And then here's our contact information. You can always feel free to contact any one of us on the team, anything that stood out in a particular category, or connect with the wonderful PREL organization. The complete team is there as well for feedback or questions or whatnot. And then we just want to thank you for your attendance and your time.
Thank you, everyone, for your attendance again. So something that we are planning on doing is all of the trainers are going to get together, and we're going to put a document together that and share in one document all of the resources that we've shared from module 1 through module 11. So that way you have all of these resources at your fingertips. I know it can be challenging to pull the resources out of the PowerPoint presentation, but this way, a single document that you will have that has all of these resources that you can share with your colleagues as well. And then add to it, if you would like to add additional resources to it. So anyway, we have one more module left, module 11, and module 11 is focused on guided reading or working with small groups to support reading, and which is very challenging to begin with when you are working face-to-face with students. What more on a virtual environment? And so it has been done. We have excellent teachers who have done it or are doing it, and they're going to be sharing their techniques and strategies with you at the next webinar. So we hope that you will be able to participate so that you can learn some good techniques and strategies to support students within a guided reading group. So thank you again. Please fill out the evaluation. We want to hear from you, if it's to share some of the great things that we've shared with you, or but we also would like to hear some of your thoughts on how we can also improve the webinar for future webinars. So thank you so much. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.
Aloha, everyone. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
team.
Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Ria.